To learn more about earning college credits with study hall courses, go to gostudyhall.com or click the link in the description. The U.S. women's national soccer team is one of the best in the world. They've won the most Women's World Cup titles, and players like Mia Hamm and Megan Rapinoe are massive stars. But had they been born just a few decades earlier, they might have never been able to play at all, because up until the 1970s, women and girls were largely excluded from sports at school, all the way from kindergarten through college. That all changed when Congress passed Title IX legislation, which was made possible by the first woman of color elected to Congress, Hawaii U.S. Representative Patsy Takimoto Mink. You've maybe heard that representation matters at places like work or on TV, but diversity and representation is especially important in Congress. When it came to Title IX, Mink had faced discrimination in her own life and career, and that was a big part of her motivation to get the bill passed. Our representatives have the power to determine what services we receive, how much we owe for our taxes, and what our rights are. But what it means to be a representative and how people choose to fulfill that duty differs a lot from person to person. Hi, I'm Carmela Boykin, and this is Study Hall, Power and Politics in U.S. Government. Every legislative representative approaches their job in their own way, and figuring out how to represent other people can get tricky. Representation happens when one person acts or speaks on behalf of or in place of another person. In government, all elected representatives are tasked with acting on behalf of their constituents, or the people who live in the area they represent. And there are several ways that representation can work. These are called models of representation. First up is the delegate model of representation, where the representative does what the constituents tell them to do, and doesn't really use their own judgment in decision-making. Their job is to enact what the constituents want, even if it's not what they personally want. They've been delegated the responsibility to stand in for the constituent. But there's also the trustee model of representation. This is when a representative sees their role as someone who is given the power to use their own reason and good judgment to do things on behalf of their constituents. They interpret things like national trends, their party's position, and their own opinion to decide what's the right thing to do for their constituents and the country. But honestly, strictly following either model can lead to problems. Sometimes what the people want isn't possible for whatever reason. Or the representative can get things wrong and do some things their constituents don't really want. So a lot of representatives actually use a combination of the two models by acting like a delegate sometimes and like a trustee at other times, depending on the issue. That's called the Politico model of representation. If the representative knows their constituency's thoughts on, say, a climate change bill, then they can act like a delegate and vote accordingly. But for other stuff that the general public is less opinionated about, like confirming the ambassador to the Republic of San Marino, then the representative usually functions like a trustee and uses their own judgment. But understanding what it means to represent someone isn't just about how elected representatives see their role. After all, in order to represent someone, there has to be someone on the other end of being represented. Voters want someone to represent their interests, but there are a couple of other ways we could describe that relationship. Substantive representation happens when the representative's own views align with the issues and interests of their constituents. It doesn't matter if the representative has any shared characteristics with the voter, as long as they're aligned on the issues. For example, a voter from the LGBTQ+ community might support a representative with a history of advocating for trans rights, even though that representative doesn't belong to the community themselves. For the most part, representatives want to and do match the opinions of their constituency, and they tend to enact policies that follow the liberal or conservative leanings of their constituents. Incumbents are very good at getting reelected after all. But that doesn't mean that there's perfect symmetry. Recent studies have shown that legislators from both parties overestimate how conservative constituents are on certain issues, and Republican legislators overestimate that more than their Democratic counterparts. There was one study that found between 2008 and 2016, Republican members of the House voted with the majority of their constituency just 52% of the time, but Democrats did so 69% of the time. There's also descriptive representation, where voters support someone who does closely resemble them in key demographics like gender, sexual orientation, or how they've been racialized. The idea is that because they share these characteristics, they better understand voters and their beliefs and bring that perspective into their politics. And that brings us back to the story of Representative Patsy Takimoto Mink. From the time she was a child, Mink wanted to be a medical doctor. But as a woman in the 1940s, she was denied admission. So she went to law school instead. As a Hawaii territorial legislator, Mink championed equality and successfully introduced a bill to establish equal pay, regardless of gender. But her career was stymied when opponents spread sexist rumors about her, like that she had a nervous breakdown while campaigning. Her election to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1964 coincided with the so-called second wave of feminism, and yet women were still excluded from places like the congressional members-only gym, so she and two other representatives staged a protest outside. While in office, Mink introduced or sponsored bills that created federal funding for childcare, bilingual education, Head Start, student loans, and special education. But the effort to amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to protect against sex-based discrimination had failed. Women continued to be excluded from a lot of colleges and universities, faced higher admissions and scholarship requirements, weren't allowed to study certain subjects, and were often prevented from participating in athletics. So, Mink joined forces with House Representative Edith Green and Senator Birch Bayh to work on getting legislation passed for equality in federally funded school programs. Mink was a major backer of what would become Title IX, which she co-sponsored alongside Green in the House. Bayh was moved to support the legislation in a large part because of experiences his wife had faced, and he introduced it to the Senate. Congress then passed Title IX in 1972. As is almost always the case for pushes in civil rights, opponents tried to thwart their efforts through new amendments and later, lawsuits. But Mink, other supporters, and the courts successfully defended it. And while sports wasn't the initial focus of Title IX, its impact has been immense. Before its passage, girls made up only 7% of varsity athletes across the country. By 2018 to 19, that became 43%. Mink and Green overcame huge challenges in their lives, and they empathized with other women facing the same issues. So they worked tirelessly to represent women in Congress. Descriptive representation at work. Bayh was a guy, but he knew what his wife and other women had faced and didn't think it should continue. His advocacy is an example of substantive representation. And that matters because, as Mink later acknowledged, everyone is hurt by gender stereotypes and discrimination by limiting their opportunities in life. Regardless of what we call their types of representation, it's clear each of these three legislators worked to make the US a more equal place for everyone. And it took knowing first or secondhand what discrimination was actually like for change to happen. That shows the benefit of having representatives who have shared experience with the people they're representing. Collective representation refers to how well Congress as a whole reflects the US population. Congress is still predominantly old white men. Very gradually, Congress has become more reflective of US demographics, but it still doesn't come close to matching the country. Young people, women, and other marginalized groups are very underrepresented relative to their population sizes. As of 2023, only just over 3% of people who ever served in Congress have been women. 3%! And less than 1% have been women of color, with over half of them being elected between 2013 and 2023. Women are just over 50% of the overall US population, but make up just 28% of Congress, which is by far the highest percentage in US history. And 75% of Congress is made up of non-Hispanic white people, despite being 59% of the US population. It's similar at the state level too, where women make up only about 30% across all state legislatures nationwide. And about 66% of state legislative seats are filled up by white people, still more than their percentage of the US population. Diversity in government is important because the US is diverse, and when the people have representatives who look like them, trust in government increases. People feel like they're actually being heard, and they take more interest in politics. Working in diverse groups just makes us better, more creative, smarter, and more productive. Plus, legislators are more likely to propose and support legislation for constituents they share characteristics with. For example, women legislators are twice as likely to introduce bills related to women's health than men. Honestly though, if having a Congress that looks like the population increases trust, then Congress should be really interested in efforts to diversify, because the public's trust in Congress is under 30%, which isn't great. But that percentage is much higher as you move from federal to state to local governments. 57% of people have trust in their state government versus 66% in their local government. And that makes sense if people feel like their local representatives understand the issues affecting them, since they're from that community themselves. The lack of trust in Congress is evident in their overall approval rating too, which is the percentage of people who think that Congress is doing a good job. In 2022, the average rating hovered around 20%. So, given that we build trust in government when our representatives look like us, the fact that the 118th Congress that began in January 2023 is the most diverse yet is reason to hope that things might get better with time. Not only does the 118th Congress have the most women in history, it also has the most members who identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual. Certainly, there's still a long way to go. In all this time, only 58 black women from only 23 states have ever been elected to Congress, and only 2 have ever been elected to the Senate. No openly trans member has been elected yet, though there are legislators like Danica Roem and Zoe Zephyr in state offices. When it comes to religion, Congress doesn't exactly reflect the US either. 88% of Congress is Christian, compared to 66% of the US population. And although 29% of people identify as agnostic, atheist, or nothing in particular, only 1 congressional legislator is openly religiously unaffiliated. But these shifts are all part of a trend, and one that shows no sign of stopping. The 118th Congress is the 7th time in a row that each Congress has been more diverse than the last. When we look at diversity trends over time, they suggest that voters are trying to create a Congress that looks like them. Mink used her time in office to combat the discrimination she had faced throughout her life, and she knew others were facing too. We all face challenges, no matter what we look like, but the world is a fairer place when the decision makers sitting at the table really understand what the people have to deal with day to day. Maybe you didn't play soccer or tennis in school, but there's a lot more to representation than you might think. So the ball is definitely in your court, or field, or whatever, when it comes to voting and holding leaders accountable. If you're enjoying Study Hall Power and Politics in US Government and are interested in taking an online course and earning college credit, visit gostudyhall.com or click the button to learn more. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.